Hello to all the viewers out there, and welcome to our live stream on the past, the present, and the future of modeling. I'm your co-host, Paul Hindmarsh. I think I've always wanted to say that, and I'll be hosting alongside Eric Broadbent of the Helix Hour. And we are joined today by the infamous Ben Adrian, who is a sound design manager, and who's a fairly new face for many Line 6 fans, which is Brandon Nelson, who is the Director of DSP and Embedded Systems Engineering. Hello, everybody.
Greetings.
Hey, so first of all, can you tell us a little bit more about yourselves and how you ended up in the position that you are now, and what you've been doing to get here, and maybe starting with Brandon. I think you're on mute, Brandon. I think you're still on mute.
Well, I guess I'll go. So my name's Ben. I am a sound designer at Line 6. I've been here about 10 years. I spent my early 20s just, I was always into science, and I wanted to own cool vintage amps. So I started buying broken amps and learning how to fix them, because that was the only way I could afford to get vintage amps. Like, dug inside. Once I started to learn stuff about that, I went to effects pedals. I started to learn how effects pedals were made and building my own pedals. And next thing I knew, I was making them for my friends. I was fixing my friend's amp. People started paying me money to build pedals for them and to fix their gear. And I also simultaneously got a job as a recording engineer in a studio, recording and mastering engineer. And then when I moved to LA about 10 years ago, I just was looking for jobs, and I came across a job for a sound designer at Line 6, and it was like, hey, you need to have audio engineer experience, need to know how tube amps work, need to be able to read schematics. And it was everything I'd just been doing as kind of my, now you would call it side hustles, throughout my 20s and 30s. And it's been great ever since.
I'm so envious of those skills. I wish I had the knowledge to be able to fix and repair things. I remember getting the first amps years and years ago and taking them to pieces and having a look inside and not even realizing that I could have been killed by an amplifier that wasn't actually, that was unplugged from the wall.
I'm glad you're still alive.
Me too. And Brandon.
Sorry, I was talking so quietly there, but yeah. So initially I started out as a guitar player and studied engineering in school, and saw a posting as I was getting toward the end of working on my master's degree that Digitech was looking for digital signal processing engineer. And, I kind of was able to marry two things that I love, the music side and the engineering side. And so I ended up there for a few years working on some of their products. And a few years down the road, I saw an opening at Line 6 and thought they did a lot of really, really interesting, innovative stuff, and wanted to live somewhere warm. And the rest is history, I guess. I ended up here in 2008, and have been involved on the DSP side of products from M13 to HD family to DT50 to Helix and on. So,
wow, nice stuff. Again, very jealous of your knowledge there. Wish I was capable of any of that stuff. And Eric.
Well, I guess I'm probably the only one on the panel that doesn't work for Line 6 directly, and I'm more so am I jealous not about the technical ability that you have, that you live in a warm climate. I would trade anything for that right now. But I guess a little background on myself. I'm a dad. I run a small web development business. I run a YouTube channel, and on the YouTube channel, I have several talk shows, but one is dedicated to the Helix Hour, to the Helix product, and it's something I discovered. We'll talk about later. I discovered later than a lot of people, and now I've dedicated about 4 years to sharing my love of that product with users around the world.
Cool, good stuff, and it's a great show. Anybody's watching, you should definitely check out the Helix Hour as well. I've got some great guests, and it's a great show. So I guess we start in the past, which was maybe before everybody's time here. I mean, for me, I started in a music store, so I'm old enough to remember when the Axis 212 appeared in the store, and I remember getting all excited when I went out to lunch and came back, and the pod, the original pod was sitting in the window as I got back in from lunch, and nobody really at the time knew what it was. And I remember taking it home, and suddenly I was able to record guitar sounds without upsetting everybody. It was a total game changer for me. And so I mean, this is a little bit of history for anybody. I mean, obviously, Line 6 started in 1996, And that was with the release of the Axis 212, which I believe, do you have that in your studio at the moment? Oh, it's sitting.
Yeah, I brought one home for this.
Yes, indeed. So I remember seeing those in, having them in the music store and stuff, and it was kind of my introduction to modeling. It was the first time I'd really become aware of it, And obviously then moved on to things like FlexTone, and then moved on to things like the Pod. Like I said before, I'm jealous of your guys' skills, but I remember getting the first Pod, and the point where you got the little chip that you had to take your Pod version 1 apart and put a little chip in it. And for a little while there, I thought I was some kind of skilled engineer, but that was the start and the end of that. What was your first first modeling product that everybody had here? What was your introduction to? Ben, I guess you were.
Yeah, so I got the Line 6 DL4, and that was probably Christmas of '99, if I'm remembering correctly. And I was an effect pedal guy, kind of a shoegazer weirdo, person all through the '90s, even long after it had gotten unpopular. And so I loved delays, and I was so excited to be able to get something that had the sound of all these delays in one pedal. So I got it. I redesigned almost my entire pedal board around it, and for a long time it was always on the board, doing one thing or another until I got an M series pedal later, like many years. But so yeah, and not long after I got the DL4, I did get a Pod 2.0 because I'd moved to California and I needed something to be able to record in a tiny apartment, and it was awesome. It was super fast, and all my friends are like, "Wait, don't you build amps and fix our amps? Why are you using a Pod?" I'm like, "Hey, this is great. I can plug it right in and go." And it did its job wonderfully.
Yeah, and they do. The sound. I remember going to see a friend, and who played like quite a big sort of live gig, and I loved it for recording. I was quite blown away by how good it sounded just straight into the PA. Even back then when it first came out. And so Brandon, I guess with the Digitech thing, you were all hooked up with the GNX and.
Yeah, GNX was my first digital guitar product. Before that, I was all I thought only tube amps and effects pedals were good enough for me, but then I found out I was really wrong. I got a GNX. I was blown away by just all of the flexibility, and had really cool features like you can go in and turn a knob and blend between amp models, and just tons and tons of flexibility. And then the first Line 6 product that I ever owned was the Echo Park delay pedal, and I ended up really getting that because I was working on another delay product, and we were getting in a bunch of competing products just to listen to them. And I was really impressed with that pedal, just how much you could do with this super simple interface. You could just affect the voicing of that delay in so many ways without getting confused and without needing to deep dive into menus.
Yeah. And so were you one of the people who had, you remember when Line 6 did, I don't know if anybody here remembers this, I'm sure maybe you remember around the time of the Echo Park, there was the pedal that you could actually program as well, wasn't there? You could actually put the model in, yeah.
That was slightly before my time, and I never bought that because I already worked for a competing company at the time, so I wasn't going to be programming Line 6 pedals.
Right, and I think just on the subject of JNX there as well. JNX has a bit of a place in my heart as well, because it was the first demos that I ever did for a music company. I was kind of drafted in to do music demos at Music Live, I think in 2002, 2003, something like that. And like a much younger me was standing on stage in Birmingham, terrified, and saying I'm never ever going to do this again. And look what happened. And then Eric, like you said before, you're a late comer to the modeling game, but what's your experience been so far?
Well, like a lot of people, I'm behind Ben there as well too. There's the Pod, the very first Pod, kind of graced my fingertips for a little bit, but other than that, I had a lot of years in music retail, and there's Line 6 products coming and going. Just never really got deep into them. But I'm not going to lie, I came into it late with Helix about 4.5 years ago, and it was introduced to me by a guest I had on one of my other shows. It was a non-Line 6 show, just talking about general gear, and this person was saying that you use Helix on the whole record. And as a Canadian, I didn't know the difference between Helix from the Canadian band or a product. And once I got into discovering Helix, it changed my life. I had like dozens of amps all over the place, tube amps. I was a tube amp guy my whole life. I was not one to, just jump into digital. And I did. I jumped in head first into Helix, and about 4.5 years later now, that's the only thing I use exclusively. I love it.
Nice. A total convert.
Yeah, you'd have to say so. Yeah.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about the technicalities of things as we've got, we've got Ben and Brandon on here. I mean, the pod version 1 it sounded so good, and it's still been used on. It was used on countless records as well, wasn't it? It wasn't just an easy way of doing things. I mean, it just did sound great. I mean, how does the modeling process that you use today? I mean, how does that differ from what was in pod version 1? I mean, I asked that of Brandon maybe.
Sure. I mean, back in the pod 1.0 days, we were really, really limited, or before my time at Line 6 was very limited by the resources that you had on the processors you were using. You just, computers were not as fast back then. So you had to make do the best with what you had. And so they were really, really clever in paring down only the most important parts of the sound. So a pod 1.0 model, or even a pod XT model, from a processing power standpoint, actually is much more similar to one of our like Helix era distortion or overdrive or fuzz pedal models. An original pod model takes like 1/5 to 1/10 of the processing power that a current generation Helix model takes. So you just had to be more I don't know, you had to pick and choose what really embodied the character of that amp, and really distill that into as little processing as you could.
Right. So I mean, would it be true to say almost that you were capturing the sound? Was it capturing the whole sound of an amp into a model, as opposed to sort of like just individual component? I mean, obviously not individual components of that part, but individual parts of the circuit.
Sure. Yeah, there was a lot more like lumping things together. Like it's in original pod, it's trying to get the character of the entire amp with a single tube stage and and filtering and various things like that. Then you progress along, and you could start to get enough processing that you could split out and do that process with the preamp and the power amp separately. So then you could start getting more flexibility.
So I mean, so does that? I guess that would mean that at that point, that was where we were able to start creating sort of like our own amps and sort of modifications and things. Because I think there was a point. I mean, going back to, I guess it was Pod XT when we started to release things like Chemical X, which I loved the Chemical X model. I thought that was great, and I remember that in reading the manual, it was the sound that was based on. And I'm going to read this off the screen here, but it was based on a Marshall SLP with a Bradshaw gain boost, which was AKA the Dookie mod, which I think is that's a Green Day album, right? Yeah. And obviously, so when XT came along, that was the point where we were able to get preamps and power amp stages from sort of classic amplifiers and sort of mold them together. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you could split those things out and do each one separately, and that went even farther. Like I don't know if you're familiar with how the DT50s work, and this might be kind of out of left field, but they're really interesting that way because they had the pre and power amp completely separate. And the power amp was an actual tube amplifier, and you could modify how it was working just with switches, so you could make these custom power amplifiers. And then the preamp, the processor was actually reading back things like the B+ voltage and the hum and various things like that. So your power amp and preamp were actually interacting with one another. They were sagging at the right time together, and making all of these custom on the fly models.
Yeah, great. I mean, I am familiar with the DT, the 50. I have to be honest. I understood how to make, because it always sounded great, but I never really understood all the negative, the negative feedback loops and all that kind of thing. It was just something that it was always just something that kind of sounded great to me, So I mean, I'm just going to go back to Chemical X there. As can I recommend that as a future Helix update? Can we do something with that again? So that was such a great thing. And I suppose like sort of moving on from there, you know, like sort of staying in the past, I guess, you know, I mean, and sort of moving through to the present. We do that with HX models now as well, don't we? We're actually kind of, we're making our own versions of different things and blending sort of, you know, bits of circuitry together and things with that as well, yeah.
What are some of the kind of the amps that don't exist in the real world that are available to us today?
Oh, let's see. Well, there was the litigator model, which went over really well. And I've talked about it on a number of these things before, but it's, you know, just kind of like a version of a very high dollar boutique amp. And it was something that, you know, I started from a normal amp model that already existed, but I went in there not knowing that I didn't have to keep anything. And I just changed around where the tone controls were. I changed around how much gain was in each stage and the ranges of the tone controls on the bass, treble, and you know, bass, middle, and treble to push them a little bit further. And the, you know, the end result is more just being able to tune, like, you know, a virtual amp, the sound of an amp that, you know, wouldn't exist in the real world, but just make it exist in the virtual world. Sounds so like retro future, but, you know, make an amp model that exists and you can play it and it feels good and sounds good and you know, provides a wonderful experience to the player, but is something that could never really, you know, exist in the physical world, at least not without some kind of crazy giant amp doing really unorthodox things.
So does that mean? So I mean, I guess that means that in the digital world, you can create something that wouldn't live long in the real world. Is that what we're saying there? You know, like it's kind of, I guess that you could create the ultimate tube amp, but, you know, in reality, it would last 5 minutes before it burned out. I mean, in the digital world, I guess there's none of that.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain instances where, you know, we might capture a tube that's running really, really hot, and we know that, you know, the tubes wouldn't last very long if we were to keep running the physical amp that way. But once we capture that sound, it can, you know, run forever in the digital world, in the models. You know, and then we can put it on a knob and you can adjust the bias. So it goes from hot to cold. And you know, it's just things that we can put in that just wouldn't be possible or don't exist or would be possible for, you know, just a very brief amount of time before the amp failed.
Yeah. And then so I mean, getting back to Brandon a little bit. So in your role, what you're creating as, you know, like when we're talking about a tube that gets extremely hot there, your role really is to create the tools that Ben then takes to actually do the modeling at that point, isn't it? So I mean, is that something that you have to think about when you're creating those tools, that it's going to be to get a tube that's really running really hot? Or
right. So you know, when we you know, look at some you know, effect that we want, or some you know, tube, whatever, however we want to affect the signal, we think of ways that we can generalize that as much as possible, so we can give you know, the sound design team as much freedom as possible to, you know, make our pentode model sound like a particular pentode model in a particular amp, or, you know, stretch that past the possibilities of where you could actually, you know, run a pentode, you know, whether it's voltage or you know, any of that. So yeah, we have to try to make them as general as possible so we can get very realistic, you know, tube models, or, you know, push it past the limits of reality.
Right. And there's maybe like different tools for all of the kinds of different components, just in kind of layman's terms here. So you might have a tool for a different type of tube, or you know, different capacitors and resistors, and hand them all over.
Yeah, different pentodes and different triodes, and just like you know, how you model interaction of a tone stack and sag, and, you know, all of these things have to be taken into account, and there are different components for all of those.
It's really clever. It's really clever stuff. I wish I understood it as much as I'd like to, you know.
Maybe to follow up on that as well, too, you guys talking about building these amplifiers and effects as well too into Helix and HX and everything. and I've had the pleasure of hanging out with most of you guys, except for Brandon at NAMM. I haven't met you in person yet. Look forward to that in the future. And all the discussions you hear at NAMM, and you hear them on all the forums and everywhere. I want to have this, my brand X favorite amp. I've got this amp behind me. It's my favorite amp. I want that in Helix. And how I know it comes down to executive decisions, what you can do and what you can't do at the time constraints. How do you make that decision going into each new firmware release on what amps to include and what's kind of sometimes maybe criteria?
It's kind of dumb luck. Well, not dumb luck. There's some research. We have Idea Scale. We have people like Eric Klein going out and talking to a lot of our customers and figuring out what people actually want. We kind of look around at the world and see which real amp models people are desirable, things that people want to play. And sometimes it's just something that one of us inside the company really likes. And it's like, this amp is really awesome. I would be really excited if I got to model this. I think it'd be a really good addition. And we kind of, we usually get that power, whether it's sometimes effects, sometimes it's amps. So it's like, I really want to do this. And people are like, yeah, if you're excited, go for it. And then this might be a good way to talk about the Cartographer amp, which was my personal amp that's behind me, which is one of those amps that it was just, I took it into work to fix it and to do some mods, and a bunch of people there played it and were like, this amp is awesome. We should model it. And I was like, really? No. And the result was, yeah. So I did it, and it's become one of the most popular models in, well, I don't know if it is, but it's become a model that a lot of people play and enjoy and use. And it's really just nice also to have my own amp in Helix that I, modified and built many years ago.
Nice.
Yes, wasn't it? And you have that amp just behind you.
Yeah, it actually started life as a trainer amp, Canada's favorite company. I've always loved trainer tube amps. Just they're kind of like unsung heroes. Don't tell anyone. They're a big secret. Just you keep it to yourself. Don't make the value shoot up. They're wonderful amps. I got this one, and someone had just done some terrible mods to it. So I went in and I just kind of rebuilt the preamp how I would want an amp preamp to be, and I kept some of the original design and did some of my own things, and I added some extra knobs and just kind of added some pull switches, and I turned it into like an amp I'd always wanted to build. And every few months I'd be like, oh, this sounds a little weird. I'll try switching out this part. So it really was. It's kind of an evolving process of amplifier, and I had done my last mod to it, and that's when it got modeled, and I haven't changed it since then. And it's, I still love to play through the physical amp, and I still love to play through the actual model.
If you close your eyes and ears, or close your eyes for that matter, and you're listening just ears, can you tell much of a difference between them?
When I originally did the model, it was very close. We do a listening test for every amp model where we'll have the amp going with a cabinet in the other room that I can't hear, or that we can't hear. And then we actually have the model going, and we have them running through the same, speaker simulator, cabinet sim, IR, whatever we want to use. And we're listening to just the electronics of the amp versus just the model of the amp. And when you do that, I probably couldn't tell the difference. But since it was my own amp, there's a couple things I did change for the model. I think I made the presence knob have a little bit more range. I did a few other, like I kind of denoised it. There was some noise in there that I just thought, well, that's what's happening in the amp, but I can take it out and I kind of like it a little better. So there's a few changes that I made where I could probably tell the difference now, but that was after doing a very accurate, spot-on model of it first.
So are there changes that you could actually go back and physically do to the real amp?
Maybe, but that would be a lot of work and trial and error and stuff. There's some things I couldn't do to the real amp. Like I probably couldn't really make the presence too much further, or change the frequency of the resonant hump of where the speaker cabinet is resonating. That I might have done just my little final tune by ear on the amp model, and that would be. I don't want to say it would be not possible, but it would probably be very expensive and expand the circuit quite a bit in a way that would be difficult and just backwards,
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out if there's that kind of interesting path where you have a traditional amplifier that turns into a digital model, or whether for somebody like yourself or Brandon that you can you can have a digital model and then actually, check what it's going to sound like, make sure it's all going to sound good, and then jump in with the real components and actually make the actual real physical amp at that stage as well. Maybe it doesn't work that way.
Brandon?
I think in some ways it's possible, as long as we don't do things that are impossible in the model. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, cool stuff. I mean, what, in terms of getting realistic models, I mean, what would you say was the biggest breakthrough, like in terms of capturing like realistic models? I mean, is that like would that be like a new way of thinking, or is it DSP based?
I think they're really closely related, right? Like we get more processing power, and it's like, if we ran a old pod model on current, higher end CPUs, it would sound exactly like an old pod model. It's not going to make it magically sound better, but when we get more and more processing power, we're able to rethink how we go about the modeling process. Like going back to how we talked about, pod 1.0 and pod XT, where we had to lump things together. There's no way at that time where we could have thought, oh, let's go and isolate, just this one tube and just this one small filter section, and just just go along the entire amp and model every single component, just in isolation. Where now, as processing power has gotten, more and more, it's just gotten faster and faster. It's enabled us to rethink our processes, and we can, go down to the, single tube stage, or single, like you said, single resistor, single capacitor, whatever, just very right down to the component level, and throw more processing at those components than we would have been able to in the past. And then, we're able to build on top of that, just build better tools that allow sound design to reconfigure things and, completely dictate signal routing however they want to. So yeah, just more processing power, better tools, just more time at it.
Yeah. And even if you're, I guess even if you're modeling individual components, even if you have, like with, unlimited sort of DSP, I guess you can just focus more and more on a component and get a better and more accurate reading of that individual component as well.
Right.
Yeah, and there was definitely a learning curve. Sometimes we found out that when, if you look at our amp models and the way that they're laid out, and you look at an amp schematic of the same amp, you can point to like, oh, this tube simulator is for this first tube. This EQ thing is for this resistor and capacitor network. This next tube filter is for the next tube. Is a very analogous relationship to how our models are built and the actual amp schematic. It's very closely linked. But when we were first starting to really do that for Helix, we would notice that sometimes our measuring tools changed the result of what was happening in the amp. And so we had this learning curve of having to go back and make sure we were capturing the data correctly, because if you have wrong data, you're going to end up with a model that is incorrect sound to what's actually happening in the real world. But that was probably the biggest change for modeling and making better, is just really being able to focus on little sections and get as many small changes through the digital signal path that are correlating to the small analog changes that happen through the actual amp signal path.
And then if you're actually building like a model from the ground up, and then you talk, I'm talking, I don't fully understand all this stuff as well, but I mean, are there classic circuits from different things that you would have a template of how you would put it, if you were creating something like, like line 6 Doom or line 6 Epic or something like that, do you have a template for a preamp that you tweak, or are you literally just going in there and using tools from Brandon to put things together?
Well, generally, if I'm doing an original amp, I'll start with an existing model that has the word is topology. And that's the word that's tossed around in amp worlds. And that's kind of like the overall structure. For instance, a Marshall Plexi amplifier and a Fender Tweed Basement amplifier have the same topology, but they sound very different because there's different pieces that are in there. But if you look at the kind of signal flow, it looks pretty identical. So in many cases, I'll start with the topology of a model that already exists, and then I'll just change, gain values, distortion values at every individual stage, EQ values from stage to stage, the tone control network. I'll change how that, responds, how much or how little sag is in the circuit. And it's kind of, when it's an original model, it's much more of a tune to taste. There have even times where I've been working and I've thought, I think this distortion sounds a little too farty, a little too fuzzy. If I add another gain stage and distort each one a little bit less and then stack them all up, it might be a tighter sound. And I'll be able to just throw in an extra tube gain stage as if I was doing a mod to add an extra tube to an amp. But it only takes, 10 minutes to try it out rather than, a day and hundreds of dollars in parts.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, we're talking a lot about sort of amps here as well, but we've had, we've got all the effects as well. Where there's the modeling in variacs, there's all of those different things. Like making life easier, life easier for musicians. And the way your team's divided, Ben. Do you all work? Obviously, because you've got Ryan, you've got Sam. Does everybody work on similar things, or do you have like an amp person and an effects person, or?
Well, it's I've been the face of modeling for a while at Line 6, but yeah, there's Ryan and Sam. They're awesome. There's, Brandon and his team that make the tools that we couldn't even do our work if they didn't exist in the first place. And yeah, we all kind of have little specialties. I love delays, so I tend to do most of the like weird distorting delay effects. I think Sam has done a lot of the modulation effects. Ryan, who's the new guy, he does a lot of the bass stuff. He has a lot of bass experience, so he's been doing a lot of the bass amp models. We kind of have music genres that we each prefer. So when there's an amp that is known to be a popular amp in that music genre, it'll kind of get passed to the engineer who's maybe the most familiar with that genre and that amp and that style. And it makes our jobs more fun and we're more engaged. And yeah, it's kind of a natural thing that we all gravitate to. Hello.
Just in terms of the amp collection, obviously the Line 6 just put out the video with the, with you, Ben, and your team, which is well worth watching, and obviously the amp collection team, the amp collection video there as well. It's an incredible collection of amps that we pull from in Calabasas, isn't it? It is like a guitar player's dream being able to see that room, and obviously the effects and amps and everything in there.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's something that's been in building well before I worked there. And, I think it's I love it. I got into this job not because really I wanted to make like the ultimate digital product. I got into this job because I love the vintage amps and the circuits. And it's nice to be able to make cool Helix stuff that's useful. And I use it in my bands and it's fantastic, but it comes from the love of the actual old gear.
Yeah, and modeling's become so much more accepted, hasn't it? It's with the start of this conversation, we're talking about when I got pod version 1, it was all about convenience. It was all about price and convenience, and not annoying my parents when I was trying to record guitar amps and stuff, and or not being able to afford to have nice amps to record at that point. But now it's they sound so good that they're used in all kinds of situations, aren't they? It's absolutely not just about convenience and price now.
Yeah, I'm getting a message saying they wanted me to show the Pod 1.0. We had to borrow this from a friend, and this was the original 1.0. It doesn't even have the 2.0 there, but this was the interface. Does anyone have any experience with the 1.0? Just it's like the grab and go pod where you just turn the amp, turn the cabinet, set it, and you're off.
Yeah, that was the one that I had, and I loved it. I keep looking on eBay actually to see if I can find another to get hold of another one. That or maybe the Chrome limited version that we had. I think again it was something else that sat in the shop for a while, and I wish so many things that you go through your life and you wish that you'd bought, isn't it?
I like a lot of the discussion when you hear people talking about the original effects as well too. There's a lot of original effects in HX, and it's so nice to see that. Jumping back into the legacy effects sometimes as well too. Like, is it possible? I'm sure it's possible, but is it possible? You guys can answer this. That a model of an effect can be better than the real thing. Are we there? Or I guess it's opinion based, but what do you think?
Yeah, better is a word that we don't really like to use when modeling, because all tone is subjective, and I don't want to tell any user that the sound that they like is wrong.
Right.
But I don't know. What do you think about this one? I definitely have an answer, but I've been talking a while. Brandon, what do you think about this?
I mean, we definitely have freedom to reduce noises and push things to places that they couldn't go, that we might prefer the sound, or increase headroom for an effect that you might want to run post amp, that if it's run post amp you're going to completely overload the saturation and the delay feedback path, things like that. And we can add additional headroom that's just not there in the real world without increasing noise. So things like that, we can improve if we consider that improvement. But yeah.
Nice.
There's one thing. There's the Adriatic delay, which is a model of my personal Boss DM2 pedal, and we already had a model in there inspired by the Boss DM2 pedal, but I liked mine, so I made this model, and when I did this model, I was able to add stuff that would be extremely difficult to add to the real one. I added modulation. I added the ability to add and remove bucket brigade chips, so you could get a cleaner or more dirty echo repeats. It extended out the delay time, but it still captured the sound of the Boss DM2 pedal, which I love, and it's my favorite physical delay to play. And so when creating a model which was inspired by it, I was able to match the sound of my personal unit and then push it a little bit further to add on features that I wish the pedal could actually have itself.
I'll try not to be too offended, since I did the original one.
And that one's great. That's a good match to the Boss DM2 pedal that Line 6 owns.
So was that a modification that you'd done to the actual physical pedal then, or was that just the way it was?
No, I had my version that I still have and I still love, but I just wanted to push it a little further. But I wouldn't want to go in and risk damaging the original circuit in mine. I could just be like, okay, here's the sound that matches. If you turn the modulation off and you have it at one like memory chip setting, it matches great. Now let's push it further and have some fun with it.
Yeah. Adding a bunch of additional bucket brigade chips like that would have been pretty difficult in the
yeah. There would have had to be like a satellite pedal.
So just Brandon, just pick up on that. So when you're saying you did the original mod there, I know you said before earlier that you were working on HD, but you were doing the same thing as Ben in sort of sound design at that point when you came in. Yeah?
So there's actually some overlap, in my team and Ben's team. We make these tools to analyze signals and write the code that implements the math to get the outcome that we want, right? But a lot of us also have a background in either in somewhat in sound design, or because we do this type of analysis and this type of development, we know how to wire these things together. And so for original Helix, I led the effort to kind of bring our effects modeling up to the same place that we had brought our amp modeling. So a lot of the initial like Helix 1.0 effects are ones that I did both the signal processing research and development and the sound design on. And then Ben and his team have taken that over and done just a lot more than I did originally. But a lot of the original Helix 1.0 models, I had a big part in a lot of those.
It's like I took apart his Legos and built a different thing with it.
That's right.
We've all done that.
So I guess moving on to I guess that kind of deals with the present. It's such a big subject that we're trying to cover in a limited amount of time here. But you know, in terms of the moving on to the future of modeling, you know, and being that it's like so much more accepted now, and you know, you can be so much more creative. I mean, where does everybody see the future of modeling going? You know, I mean, if I was to direct that maybe at Ben first, and you know, what is the future of modeling?
Well, I kind of see modeling going in two directions at the same time that are both, I believe, equally as valid. As we get more processing power and as branding gives me more fun things to play with, I think we're going to be able to make amp models that capture even more and more of the little details that happen in the very complicated and interactive, you know, real tube amp circuits. And we're going to be able to match those details in our digital circuits. And, you know, we're always going to be limited by DSP. And then as we get more and more, we uncover more and more, and the amp models get more and more realistic. And that's super great. And there's a certain kind of player that wants it to be as realistic as possible. And then there's another kind of player, and, you know, at risk of, you know, aging myself, that's much younger than me, that probably grew up playing guitar in a world where they maybe didn't have access to the same library of vintage amps, and they didn't grow up seeing, like, you know, the rock gods playing their giant tube stacks, and guitar is just maybe more part of an ensemble, especially music that has, you know, laptops, computers backing tracks, and in that case they may have never used a physical amp, or they may have, you know, they don't really see the amp doesn't have to amplify the sound to the audience anymore. So then the amp models don't really become anything that has to even relate to the real world. It's just the thing that you plug your guitar through that adds, you know, some distortion, that allows you to adjust the tone, that allows, you know, the kind of final sound to be sculpted that you want people to hear. The whole concept of what an amp is gonna, I think, changing for a certain generation of guitarists. And in that case, it's cool to open as many doors as we can to make sounds that, you know, wouldn't otherwise be possible, to make amp models more tonally flexible, to have something that just feels good to play and feels interactive and inspires a player, and not even care about what's going on in the real world, or if it sounds or behaves like some vintage amp model that some guitar hero from, you know, 1972 played. And I think that's equally as valid, and I think that's going to push the sound of guitar forward. So, and I think they both can exist at the same time and both be fun worlds for me to work in and play in.
That's a great answer, Ben. Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. You know, I mean, like yourself, you know, I kind of grew up with all the traditional amps and things, and that's, you know, when I got it, like, was interested in modeling, that's what I was interested in. And, you know, as you get older, you see a lot of players who just don't want to carry heavy amps and things and stuff like. But you know, I am exactly like yourself. I'm seeing a lot of players who don't have that sort of background, and they don't need to have that kind of background. You know, it doesn't make any difference to them creating music, does it? You know, it's so yeah, yeah. And then Brandon, like your thoughts on the future of modeling?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I have to add. I completely agree with everything Ben said. I think, you know, there's the one side that's always going to want, you know, I want this to sound like something I'm familiar with. And there's something really nice about that, right? Like, you're looking for a sound and you say, I want it to sound kind of like this, and it's a known quantity, and you know, you have a good starting point. But then, you know, there is the side who has less familiarity with vintage gear or, you know, existing tube amps. And really what they want is to be able to pull something up that immediately sounds good, and it's easy to tweak into areas, and it's difficult to get it into a place that sounds bad. So, you know, I think there's a big opportunity for both the, you know, accurate to existing real world stuff, and then just pushing things beyond what actually exists out there, just, you know, for a lot of our original and you know, good sounding and easy to use models.
And Eric, your thoughts on modeling? I mean, as a sort of late adapter to it, adopter, yeah, I guess you must be seeing red.
You know, years ago, we thought we were going to have these video phones. We could talk to people we were talking to. We never knew that was going to happen. We're going to have flying cars. We have those things coming out now. I really don't know. I'm just so happy with my tone. Like I've said this several times recently with Helix. Like, I've never had a better tone that I've captured. I'm not a guy that can put a microphone on a cabinet and get a good sound. I've just never been that guy. So I don't know where it's going. I just know I'm here for the ride. I don't have a thought as to where it's going. I just want to be part of it.
Yeah, cool. And I mean, just in terms of like amp designs that couldn't exist in the real world, do we think we're going to see a lot more of them? Is that going to be something that comes along?
I can't see that. You know, yes, I think that has to happen because, you know, as good as we get to matching vintage amps, you know, once we get that, then what are we going to do? And people are, you know, that we need to make more stuff. And, you know, the experience of playing through a lot of the original amps has been very well received, at least by our, you know, our users on our forums and people I've talked to. So for me, it's, you know, that was some of the most fun, was building the original amps. And it's kind of, I get to be a little more artist and a little less scientist. And while I like doing both, it's probably more scientist. So when I get to shift towards more artist, it's great. And, you know, given the opportunity, I'll make as many original amps as they'll let me.
I mean, something else we should mention. We had this conversation the other day. Is the availability of components for original, you know, for original amps, but for actual traditional amplifiers as well. You know, I think it's getting hold of tubes and things, and that is going to be something that probably causes some. It's a long time since I bought a tube actually, so I'm assuming that are getting more and more difficult to buy. Has everybody got a good stash?
Oh yeah, I think I have enough for the rest of my life for my favorite amps. You know, and then whatever else we can scour for work, but you know.
So there must be a good stash of tubes in line 6 as well. You must have a good spare. Must be some good ones in Calabasas.
Yeah, I mean, all of our amps have as close to vintage tubes in them as we can, and you know, we've gotten some that are stashed away, and you know, I think between all the amps that we have, we're probably pretty good for a while. We can swap in between if we need.
We'll get our tubes of you now.
I'm just trying to figure. I'm just thinking. I've got some tube amps that I haven't been retubed for a long time. Maybe next time in Calabasas, you show us where the stash is, and I can get inside there. And I suppose just maybe the final question, but I think we've answered it already. You know, like, you know, is there a place for traditional tube amplifiers? And you know, I think what's coming back from this conversation is everybody still, you know, everybody in line 6 loves gear, and that's why you guys, you know, everybody does what they do. Yeah, so you know, you still feel like there's a place in the world for them.
Brandon?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's something about, you know, no matter how much gear I play with, there's something about the immediacy, right, of just like plugging into a tube amp and turning it up really loud. And I don't know if it's a common term, but there's the line 6 term, the you know, feeling your pants flap or whatever it is with a loud tube amp. But yeah, I mean, honestly, to your point, like the only thing that I think can get in the way of that'll make them like go away in the future is like if parts become unavailable someday, right? But yeah, I think they're here to stay for a long time.
I always have this kind of joke that I tell where it's like I think of like guitar rigs, and I think of like other instruments. Like if you think of a clarinet player, the sound of a clarinet is like, you know, the guy comes to the clarinet, the man or woman who plays clarinet goes to the gig, they have their clarinet case, and that's kind of it. I think there's a lot of classic guitar sounds that have become part of, I think, the general intellectual consensus of people. A lot of rock guitar sounds, like, you know, a Les Paul into a Marshall, a Strat into a Twin. There's those things, and people are always going to want to have those sounds. That's just classic music now. That is what people know. And as long as that exists, I think there will always be people who want to plug their classic gear into their classic amp and get the classic sound. And that's the world we live in, and it's awesome and it's beautiful. And if we, you know, it doesn't mean we can't coexist with that world and have things that work well for us either.
Yeah, really interesting what you said before about those different types of player. You know, like where we'll be in, you know, sort of 20 years time when, you know, when people just don't, you know, a lot of people just don't need that and they don't have the background of that, and modeling is where everything's coming from them, you know. So
Hey, Paul,
Yeah.
just before you wrap up, too, something I think we should mention as well is the fact that I hear this every time at NAMM. I've only been there 3 or 4 times, but at the Line 6 event, it's something that makes me feel special is being members of these different Facebook groups. There's a lot of them. I'm sure we're all members of the various Line 6, the Helix and all the different, subcategories and stuff like that. These groups, there's groups all around the world. Chad's in the chat's got one of the biggest groups there is. It's the official, the biggest one, but we've got groups all over the world for every, denominator of product. And Joe and the team have always made everyone feel like they're part of it. All these groups together make the largest community in the world. And it's just mind blowing how many users there are around the world, and it's growing daily, and they're dedicated to bass guitar, they're dedicated to guitar, to everything in between. And just so nice to see people coming together around the world and sharing their ideas, sharing presets, teaching lessons, all that stuff. Is just, I feel good to be part of that as well too.
Yeah, and that's something that I guess you did. I mean, it wasn't there because it didn't sort of exist then, is it? But with the sort of traditional amps, you don't really have that kind of community of sharing things, and you say like presets and ideas and things, and how to craft your tone. So yeah, it's a great community. It's good. It's a good point,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think I sort of running out of time a little bit now. So I mean, Brandon, it's great to really get a chance, to get a chance to talk to you and really realize sort of how important you are in the building, because you're one of these guys who's always sort of hidden out the way whenever I'm in Calabasas, so we've never really had a chance to talk much and stuff, so it's really interesting to hear about, like you creating the tools and Ben taking those tools and, and actually creating the sort of the amp models and things that we love there, so yeah, I mean, I think we'll wrap up now, but I mean, thank you very much, everybody, for imparting some information there, when I'll, next, hopefully get to see everybody at NAMM, whenever the next NAMM is that I can kind of get to, and, who knows these days. So, I mean, thank everybody else for, all the viewers for watching this and stuff, and, any questions or anything, we'll keep an eye on sort of Facebook and stuff, and just sort of jump in and, answer them post this event and stuff as well. And I think this is going to it'll remain on YouTube and on Facebook as well, so. Right, well, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you, Paul.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. See you later. Bye.